August 16, 1936. The champagne glass trembled in Coach Marcus Hartwell's weathered hand as he raised it toward Jesse Owens at the Berlin Olympic victory reception. The Nazi waiter who'd served it smiled and stepped back into the crowd. Marcus had noticed something in the man's eyes, something cold, something wrong. So when Jesse reached for his glass, Marcus grabbed it first and drank it down in one gulp. Within 30 seconds, his throat was burning. Within 2 minutes, he was convulsing on the marble floor of Hitler's reception hall. The waiter had vanished. What happened in that moment changed everything. Jesse Owens lived to become a legend. Marcus Hartwell lived to carry a secret that would hunt him for 40 years. And somewhere in the shadows, a Nazi assassin waited. The night Marcus Hartwell saved a hero, the night he signed his own death warrant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The marble floor felt like ice against Marcus's cheek as his body seized. Through the haze of poison coursing through his veins, he could hear the shocked gasps of Olympic dignitaries, the scrape of chairs being pushed back, the urgent shouts in German echoing off the ornate walls of the Reich Chancellery. Jesse's face appeared above him, eyes wide with horror. "Marcus, what the hell?" The waiter, Marcus managed to rasp between convulsions, his throat feeling like molten metal. "Find?" The waiter. But even as Jesse's head snapped up to scan the crowd, Marcus knew it was too late. The man with the cold eyes had melted into the sea of uniformed officials and Olympic delegates like he'd never existed at all. German medics rushed forward, their voices a rapid-fire exchange of medical terms Marcus couldn't understand through the fog of agony. Someone pressed a hand to his forehead. Another checked his pulse. He felt himself being lifted, carried, the crystal chandeliers of Hitler's reception hall spinning overhead like deadly stars. "Vergiftung," one of the medics said sharply. "Poisoning." The irony wasn't lost on him, being saved by Nazi doctors after being poisoned by a Nazi assassin. But as the darkness began to creep in at the edges of his vision, Marcus's last coherent thought wasn't about his own survival. It was about the look of pure, calculating hatred he'd seen in that waiter's eyes, a look that said this wasn't over. Detroit, October 2019. The package arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus Hartwell, now 73 and hunched with arthritis, sat in his usual spot by the window of Sunset Manor's common room, watching the autumn leaves spiral down onto 8 Mile Road. The nurse who brought him his mail was new, barely out of college, with kind eyes that reminded him of his late wife. "This one doesn't have a return address, Mr. Hartwell," she said, setting the small brown package on his lap. "Should I have security take a look?" Marcus studied the careful block lettering of his name and address. Something about the precise European script made his chest tighten. "No, that's all right, Sarah. I've got it." She lingered for a moment, clearly curious, but respected his privacy and moved on to distribute mail to the other residents. Marcus waited until she was out of earshot before carefully tearing away the brown paper. Inside was a small wooden box, the kind used to display expensive jewelry. His hands shook, not from age this time, but from recognition. He'd seen this box before, 83 years ago, in the private collection room behind Hitler's reception hall. The champagne flute nestled in black velvet was crystal clear, catching the afternoon light like trapped starfire. But it was the note tucked beneath it that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water in his veins. "You should have died that night." The handwriting was the same as the address label, careful, precise, European. Marcus's mind raced back to that marble floor in Berlin, to the burning in his throat, to the waiter's face disappearing into the crowd. For 40 years he'd convinced himself the man was dead. Had to be dead. The war had claimed millions. The Nazi regime had crumbled. Surely time had finished what the Allies had started. But the flute in his lap told a different story. His cell phone buzzed against his hip, a text from his grandson Tyler. "Hey Grandpa, can we meet this weekend? Want to talk about that documentary project I mentioned?" Tyler, 28 years old, bright as a whip, and determined to uncover every detail of his grandfather's Olympic legacy for some film school project. The boy had no idea what kind of history he was digging into. Marcus stared at the champagne flute, his reflection fractured in its crystal surface. In those broken pieces he could see it all. Jesse's terrified face, the Nazi waiter's cold smile, the marble floor rushing up to meet him as the poison took hold. He'd thought saving Jesse's life was the end of the story. Now he realized it might have only been the beginning. Another text from Tyler, actually I've already started some preliminary research, found some interesting inconsistencies in the official Olympic records from Berlin. Can't wait to show you what I've discovered. Marcus's finger hovered over the reply button, but no words came. How could he tell his grandson that some stones were better left unturned? That some heroes' stories were built on foundations that would crumble if examined too closely? Outside his window, the Detroit traffic hummed past, oblivious to the old man holding a piece of Nazi history in his weathered hands. Somewhere out there, an assassin who should have been long dead was making good on a promise 40 years in the making, and Marcus's grandson was walking blindly into the crosshairs. The champagne flute caught the light again, and for just a moment Marcus could swear he saw that waiter's cold smile reflected in its crystal depths. The champagne flute felt impossibly heavy in Marcus's hands as he carefully placed it back in its velvet-lined box. His arthritis protested the movement, joints grinding like rusted gears, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold dread spreading through his chest. He closed the lid with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet common room. Around him, Sunset Manor's afternoon routine continued undisturbed. Mrs. Chen worked on her crossword puzzle near the fireplace, muttering about 7-letter words for treachery. Mr. Kowalski dozed in his wheelchair by the television, the Tigers game playing to an audience of one sleeping veteran. The smell of institutional coffee mixed with the faint medicinal scent that seemed to permeate every surface, creating an atmosphere Marcus had grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. But today, the familiar comfort felt like a facade. Every shadow in his peripheral vision seemed to move independently. Every footstep in the hallway made his pulse quicken. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Tyler's contact photo, his grandson laughing at last Christmas dinner, flour in his dark hair from helping with the baking. The image made Marcus's throat constrict with something deeper than the memory of poison. Tyler had his mother's eyes, bright green and curious about everything. Too curious, sometimes. The boy had inherited the family stubbornness too. Once Tyler latched onto a project, he was like a terrier with a bone. Last year, it had been their family's immigration story, tracking down relatives in Ireland neither of them knew existed. The year before, he'd spent months researching the automotive industry for a film about Detroit's golden age. Now he wanted to dig into the Olympics, into Berlin, into the night that had shaped everything that came after. Marcus's finger traced the edge of his phone screen. He should call Tyler, tell him to drop the documentary project, make up some excuse about privacy, about not wanting to relive old memories. But he knew his grandson well enough to understand that resistance would only fuel his curiosity. Tyler would dig deeper, ask harder questions, and eventually stumble onto something that would put him directly in the crosshairs of a man who had waited 83 years to finish what he started. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Marcus." The voice made him jump, nearly dropping his phone. Dr. Elena Rodriguez settled into the chair beside him, her nurse practitioner badge catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. She'd been tending to Sunset Manor's residents for 5 years, and Marcus had grown to appreciate her directness. She didn't coddle them or speak in the patronizing tone some of the younger staff used. "Just old memories," he said, sliding the wooden box behind a throw pillow. "They have a way of sneaking up on you." Elena's dark eyes studied his face with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading the subtle signs of distress. "Your color's off, and your hands are shaking." Marcus looked down at his weathered fingers, noting the tremor he couldn't quite control. On the inside of his left wrist, a small scar caught the light, barely visible now, faded to a thin white line. The mark where the 4 had gone in during those 3 days in the German hospital when they'd pumped his stomach and flushed the poison from his system. He rubbed the scar unconsciously, a habit he'd developed over the decades. Blood pressure medication acting up again, he lied smoothly. I'll mention it to Dr. Patterson at my next appointment. Elena nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. You know where to find me if you need anything. Don't try to tough it out. That's how we end up with emergencies. After she left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts and the weight of the hidden box. Through the window, he watched a young mother push her toddler on the playground across the street. The child's laughter carried on the October wind, pure and unburdened by the knowledge that monsters sometimes wore waiters' uniforms and served death in crystal glasses. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Tyler. Found a photo of you and Jesse Owens at the reception. You're holding a champagne flute in your hand right before the incident. Weird detail. There's a waiter in the background who doesn't appear in any other photos from that night, almost like he vanished. Did you ever notice that? Marcus's blood turned to ice. Tyler had already found the waiter. Somehow in his preliminary research, his grandson had identified the one face that should have remained hidden forever, the face that belonged to a man who was supposed to be dead, but had instead spent 8 decades planning his revenge. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Detroit, casting long shadows across the nursing home grounds. Marcus clutched his phone, Tyler's message glowing on the screen like a warning flare in the darkness. His grandson's enthusiasm and intelligence, the very qualities that made him such a gifted filmmaker, were about to make him a target. The waiter was alive. Tyler was digging into dangerous territory, and Marcus was the only one who understood what was coming. Marcus stared at Tyler's text until the words blurred together on the screen. The waiter in the background who doesn't appear in any other photos. His grandson had found him in less than a week of preliminary research, the ghost who had haunted Marcus's nightmares for 40 years. Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus's arthritic fingers were dialing Tyler's number. The phone rang once, twice, and then his grandson's familiar voice filled the line. "Grandpa, perfect timing. I was just going through more archival footage from Berlin. You're not going to believe what I—" "Tyler!" Marcus's voice came out sharper than intended, cutting through his grandson's enthusiasm like a blade. "We need to talk. Now, in person." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. When Tyler spoke again, his tone had shifted from excitement to concern. "Is everything okay? You sound different. Can you come to Sunset Manor tonight? Not tomorrow. Not this weekend. Tonight. Yeah, of course. I was planning to stay late at the studio anyway. I can be there by 7. Grandpa, what's going on?" Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 8 decades pressing down on his shoulders. "Just come, Tyler, and bring everything you've found so far. Everything." After ending the call, Marcus sat in the gathering dusk of the common room, the wooden box heavy in his lap, like a time bomb counting down to detonation. Mrs. Chen had finished her crossword and shuffled off to dinner. Mr. Kowalski had been wheeled away by his evening aide. The television droned on to an empty room, showing highlights from a football game that felt as distant as events on another planet. When the dinner bell chimed through the halls, Marcus didn't move. His appetite had vanished the moment he'd seen that champagne flute. Instead, he pulled out the box and opened it once more, studying the crystal surface in the lamplight. Somewhere in its faceted depths, he could almost see that night in Berlin, the glittering reception hall, Jesse's proud smile as he raised his own glass in a toast, the waiter's cold eyes as he watched from the shadows. The note lay beneath the flute like an accusation. "You should have died that night." But it wasn't just a threat, Marcus realized now. It was a statement of fact. In the waiter's mind, Marcus had stolen something that belonged to him. Not just his target, but his purpose, his mission. For a true believer, failure of that magnitude wasn't something you walked away from. It was something that festered, grew, became an obsession that could span lifetimes. "Mr. Hartwell?" Marcus looked up to find Sarah, the young nurse, standing in the doorway with a concerned expression. "You missed dinner. I brought you a sandwich and some soup." She set the tray on the side table, her eyes flickering to the wooden box in his lap. To her credit, she didn't ask about it directly, but Marcus could see the curiosity in her face. "Thank you," he said, closing the box again. "My grandson is coming to visit tonight. We'll be in the family conference room if anyone needs me. Of course. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. Sarah hesitated at the doorway. Mr. Hartwell, if you need anything tonight, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. Sometimes old memories can be overwhelming. After she left, Marcus forced himself to eat a few bites of the sandwich, though it tasted like cardboard in his mouth. The soup was chicken noodle, probably from a can, but it reminded him of the meals his wife used to make when Tyler was little and came to stay with them during summer vacations. The boy would sit at their kitchen table, eyes wide as Marcus told sanitized versions of his Olympic stories. Tales of triumph and friendship, with all the darkness carefully edited out. Now those careful omissions were coming back to haunt them both. At exactly 7 o'clock, Marcus heard Tyler's voice in the hallway, chatting with Sarah about the weather and traffic. His grandson appeared in the doorway moments later, laptop bag slung over his shoulder and a manila folder tucked under his arm. Even in the dim light of the common room, Marcus could see the resemblance to his late daughter, the determined set of the jaw, the intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Grandpa," Tyler said, settling into the chair Elena had vacated hours earlier. "You look like hell." "Language," Marcus said automatically, then caught himself. After tonight, his grandson's choice of words would be the least of his concerns. He stood carefully, his joints protesting after hours of sitting. "Come on, we're going to need privacy for this conversation." As they walked toward the family conference room, Tyler's footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway, Marcus felt the last vestiges of his peaceful retirement crumbling away. The package had shattered more than just his sense of security. It had destroyed the illusion that the past could stay buried forever. The waiter was alive, and he was coming for them all. The family conference room felt smaller than Marcus remembered as he closed the door behind them. Tyler was already unpacking his laptop, manila folders spread across the oak table like evidence at a crime scene. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh institutional white. "So," Tyler said, opening his laptop screen, "I've been going through the Olympic Committee archives, and there are some serious inconsistencies in the official record from Berlin. The incident report about your poisoning, it's been heavily redacted, almost like someone went through it decades later and—" "Stop!" Marcus set the wooden box on the table between them with a soft thud. "Before you go any further, I need you to understand something. This isn't just history anymore." Tyler's fingers paused over his keyboard, his green eyes shifting from the screen to the box. "What is that?" Instead of answering, Marcus opened the lid. The champagne flute caught the harsh fluorescent light, throwing fractured rainbows across the conference room walls. Tyler leaned forward, his documentary instincts clearly recognizing something significant. "Jesus, Grandpa, is that—" "The original glass. From that night." Marcus pulled out the note, his hands steadier now that the moment had finally arrived. This came with it. Tyler read the note twice, his face growing pale. "When did you get this?" "Today. A few hours before you texted me about finding the waiter in those photos." The silence stretched between them like a wire under tension. Tyler's laptop screen had gone dark, but neither of them moved to wake it. Outside in the hallway, Marcus could hear the evening shift arriving, Sarah's voice greeting the night supervisor, wheelchair wheels rolling past the conference room door. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a place where the most exciting thing was usually someone sneaking extra pudding from the kitchen. "This is some kind of sick joke," Tyler said finally. "Has to be. The guy would be over 100 years old by now. He's probably been dead for decades." Marcus reached across the table and touched his grandson's wrist, feeling the steady pulse beneath warm skin. "I thought the same thing. For 40 years, I convinced myself he was gone. But look at that handwriting, Tyler. Look at how precise it is. That's not the work of some prankster or conspiracy theorist. That's him. But how would he even know where to find you? How would he know about me?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Marcus had been asking himself the same thing since opening the package. The retirement home wasn't exactly public knowledge. He'd moved here quietly 3 years ago after his second heart attack. His address wasn't listed in any Olympic records or veterans directories. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I know he's real and I know he's been waiting. Men like that, they don't forget, they don't forgive, they just plan." Tyler pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the linoleum. He walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say this psycho-Nazi is still alive and holding an 80-year grudge. What does he want? You? Me? What's the endgame here?" Marcus joined his grandson at the window. In the parking lot below, a security guard was making his rounds, flashlight beam dancing between the cars. Such a normal sight, but tonight it made Marcus's chest tighten. How long had they been watched? How many times had someone stood in these shadows, planning, waiting for the right moment? "I think," Marcus said slowly, "he wants to finish what he started. But not just the killing, the mission. Whatever that mission really was. You said he was trying to poison Jesse Owens. Because he was black, because he'd embarrassed Hitler's master race theory at the Olympics. That's what I thought for 40 years. But now—" Marcus touched the scar on his wrist, the old gesture of anxiety. "Your research found inconsistencies. What if the official story was wrong? What if there was more to it than racial hatred?" Tyler turned from the window, his documentary instincts finally overriding his shock. "You think the poisoning was about something else? I think a man doesn't wait 8 decades for simple revenge. I think there was something bigger at stake that night, something worth killing for, something worth dying for." The conference room felt colder now, despite the heating system's steady hum. Tyler returned to his laptop, fingers flying over the keys as he pulled up digital files. "I've got about 30 photos from that reception. The waiter appears in exactly 3 of them, always in the background, always watching. But here's the weird thing. In the German archives, those 3 photos are catalogued differently from the others. Different classification numbers, different storage protocols, as if someone tried to bury them. Or protect them." Tyler's screen filled with a black and white photograph from the reception. Marcus could see himself in the background, younger and stronger, Jesse Owens beside him raising a toast. And there, barely visible behind a marble column, was a face that had haunted his nightmares. The waiter was smiling. Marcus felt his knees buckle as he stared at the photograph. That smile, cold, predatory, satisfied, was exactly as he remembered it from the split second before the poison hit his system. But seeing it now, captured in digital clarity after 8 decades, revealed something he'd missed in the chaos of that night. "He knew," Marcus whispered, gripping the edge of the conference table. "Look at his expression, Tyler. He's not watching Jesse, he's watching me." Tyler zoomed in on the waiter's face, the pixels sharpening into focus. "What do you mean?" "I always thought I ruined his plan by drinking the champagne meant for Jesse, a heroic accident." Marcus's voice cracked on the last word. "But what if it wasn't an accident? What if I was always the real target?" The implications hit Tyler like a physical blow. His fingers froze over the keyboard as he processed what his grandfather was suggesting. "That doesn't make sense. You were nobody important, just a track coach." "Was I?" Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands, scrolling through decades-old contacts until he found what he was looking for. "There's someone I need to call. Someone I should have called 40 years ago. Grandpa, it's almost 8 o'clock at night. Who are you?" The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Hartwell? Jesus Christ, I thought you were dead." "Not yet, Sam, but someone's trying to change that." Marcus put the call on speaker, gesturing for Tyler to stay quiet. "I need to know about Berlin. The real story this time." Samuel Morrison had been the Olympic Committee's head of security in 1936, a former FBI agent who'd specialized in protecting American athletes from international threats. He'd also been the one to classify Marcus's poisoning as a random act of Nazi violence. Case closed, file buried. Berlin was 84 years ago, Marcus. Ancient history. Ancient history just sent me this. Marcus held up the champagne flute to the phone's camera, then remembered Sam couldn't see it. "The original glass, Sam. along with a note that says I should have died that night. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Tyler checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When Sam finally spoke, his voice had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. Where are you right now? Sunset Manor Retirement Home in Detroit. With my grandson Tyler. Sam, what aren't you telling me? What really happened in Berlin? Another pause, this one filled with the sound of papers shuffling and a door closing. There were rumors, Marcus, whispers that never made it into the official reports. The waiter who poisoned you, he wasn't working alone. Tyler leaned closer to the phone, his documentary instinct screaming that they were finally approaching the truth. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs, each beat painful and irregular. Tell me, Marcus said. There was supposed to be a meeting that night, after the reception. Jesse Owens was going to pass along something he'd been asked to carry, photographs, documents, we never knew exactly what, intelligence that could have exposed Nazi sympathizers embedded in the American Olympic movement. High-level people, Marcus. People with real power. The conference room seemed to tilt around them. Tyler gripped his laptop screen, watching his grandfather's face drain of color as the truth finally emerged from its decades-long burial. Jesse was working as a courier? Marcus's voice barely rose above a whisper. Not willingly. The OSS approached him after his victories, when he was still in Berlin. They knew he'd be above suspicion. Who would suspect America's greatest Olympic hero of espionage? But someone leaked the operation, someone on our side. Tyler's mind raced through the implications, so the waiter wasn't trying to silence Jesse about embarrassing Hitler. He was trying to stop Jesse from exposing American collaborators. And Marcus wasn't a hero who accidentally saved Jesse's life, Sam continued, his voice heavy with guilt. He was the security leak they were really after, the one person who could identify the waiter and trace him back to his American handlers. Marcus sank into his chair as 40 years of carefully constructed heroism crumbled around him. He'd spent decades believing he'd saved Jesse Owens from racial hatred, accepting quiet recognition and living with the modest pride of having done the right thing. But the truth was so much worse. I was never a hero, he said. I was a target. And my survival meant Jesse died protecting secrets that got buried anyway. Jesse died in 1980 of lung cancer, Marcus. Natural causes. He died carrying the weight of those secrets, never able to tell the truth about Berlin, about what really happened that night. And I've been living a lie ever since. Tyler reached across the table, covering his grandfather's weathered hand with his own. But Marcus pulled away, the guilt and shame of 8 decades finally catching up with him. The waiter's smile in the photograph suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't failed in Berlin, he'd simply been delayed. And now, with Tyler's documentary threatening to uncover the truth, the mission was finally ready to be completed. The weight of Sam's revelations settled over the conference room like a shroud. Tyler stared at his grandfather, watching 40 years of carefully constructed identity collapse in real time, but something nagged at him, a detail that didn't fit the neat narrative they'd just assembled. "Wait," Tyler said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. If Grandpa was the security leak, how did the waiter know which glass was his? They were at a reception with hundreds of people. Sam's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you're trying to poison a specific target in a crowd, you need inside information." Someone had to tell the waiter exactly where Marcus would be standing, what he'd be drinking, when he'd be vulnerable. Tyler's documentary training kicked in. The same instinct that had helped him uncover inconsistencies in corporate cover-ups. Who arranged the seating that night? Who knew the security protocols? The silence stretched until Marcus felt his chest tighten. When Sam finally spoke, his voice had changed. Older, more careful, like a man realizing he'd said too much. "Marcus, I think you should focus on protecting yourself and your grandson. The past is—" "You son of a bitch!" The words escaped Marcus before he could stop them. 40 years of suppressed intuition suddenly crystallizing into terrible clarity. It was you. You were the leak. Marcus, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. The champagne wasn't meant for Jesse, and it wasn't meant for me. Marcus's voice grew stronger with each word, the pieces falling into place with sickening precision. It was meant for whoever got too close to the truth. a flexible target, and you were there to make sure the investigation went nowhere afterward. Tyler felt his world tilting. Sam, tell me he's wrong. The pause stretched long enough for Tyler to count his own heartbeats. When Sam finally responded, his voice carried a different quality, colder, more calculated. The friendly concern had evaporated like morning mist. You always were too smart for your own good, Marcus. Even back then, I worried you'd figure it out eventually. 40 years later than I expected, but still. The casual admission hit Tyler like a physical blow. This man, this family friend who'd sent Christmas cards and attended his grandmother's funeral, was confessing to decades of deception with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. Why? Marcus's voice cracked on the single word. Because some things matter more than individual lives. The Olympic movement, international relations, American interests abroad, these are bigger than one man's heroic story or one athlete's inconvenient knowledge. Tyler grabbed the phone, his hands shaking with rage. You let my grandfather think he was a hero for 40 years while planning to kill him? I protected him for 40 years, Sam corrected, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made Tyler's skin crawl. The waiter wanted to finish the job immediately after Berlin. I convinced him to wait. Told him Marcus was more valuable alive as a witness to our cover story. But now, with your little documentary project threatening to expose everything, the threat hung in the air like poison gas. Tyler thought of all the interviews he'd conducted, the archives he'd accessed, the digital trail he'd left across half a dozen research databases. Every click, every query, every phone call had been leading them deeper into a trap that had been decades in the making. Where is he? Marcus asked quietly. Who? The waiter, your hired killer. Where is he now? Sam's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. Oh, Marcus, you still don't understand, do you? There never was a waiter. Not in the sense you mean. Tyler felt the last solid ground beneath his feet disappear. What are you talking about? The man who served that champagne wasn't some Nazi fanatic or German agent. He was one of ours. American intelligence working under my direction. The whole operation was designed to look like a foreign attack while we cleaned up a domestic mess. The conference room spun around Marcus as 84 years of carefully maintained reality shattered completely. Every newspaper article, every official report, every quiet moment of pride he'd felt about saving Jesse Owens, all of it had been orchestrated by the man whose voice was now calmly explaining his betrayal through a retirement home telephone. Jesse was going to expose American Nazi sympathizers in the Olympic Committee, Sam continued, his tone almost conversational. People who'd been recruited by German intelligence, yes, but also people who genuinely believed in the cause. Wealthy donors, board members, even some athletes. The scandal would have destroyed American Olympic credibility for generations. So you killed him, Tyler whispered. We tried to. Your grandfather's interference complicated things, but it also provided perfect cover. A heroic coach accidentally poisoned while saving America's greatest athlete. It was actually a better story than what we'd planned. Marcus found his voice, though it sounded like it was coming from someone else. And now you're going to finish what you started. What I'm going to do, Sam said, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty, is protect American interests, just like I've been doing for the past 84 years. The line went dead. Tyler stared at the phone screen as if willing Sam's voice to return, to take back the casual confession that had just rewritten everything they thought they knew. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of a television laugh track from somewhere down the retirement home corridor. Marcus sat motionless in his chair, his weathered hands folded in his lap like he was praying. But Tyler could see the tension in his grandfather's shoulders, the way his jaw worked silently, as if he were having a conversation with ghosts. How long? Marcus finally asked. What? How long have you known? Marcus turned to face his grandson, and Tyler was startled by the clarity in his grandfather's eyes. No confusion, no shock, just the steady gaze of a man who'd finally stopped lying to himself. Something in your research made you suspicious before tonight. What was it? Tyler felt heat rise in his cheeks. His grandfather was right. There had been inconsistencies, details that hadn't quite aligned with the heroic narrative he'd grown up hearing. But he'd pushed those doubts aside, more interested in crafting a compelling documentary than questioning his family's foundational myth. The medical records, Tyler admitted. When I requested your hospital files from Berlin, the symptoms you experienced didn't match any known Nazi poison protocols. They were more consistent, with drugs developed by American intelligence services in the 30s. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I thought I was wrong. I thought maybe the records were incomplete, or translated badly, or... Tyler's voice broke. I didn't want to be right. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding. And now we both have to live with what's true instead of what we wanted to believe. Outside in the hallway, the evening medication rounds were beginning. Tyler could hear the soft ding of the elevator, the rustle of a cart being wheeled from room to room, Sarah's voice gently reminding residents to take their pills. Normal sounds of a normal evening, but now they seemed ominous. How easy would it be for someone to walk these halls unchallenged? How simple to deliver the wrong medication to the right room? We need to leave, Tyler said, already closing his laptop. Right now. Sam knows exactly where we are, and if he's been planning this for 40 years... No. Marcus's voice carried surprising authority. Running won't solve anything. It'll just delay the inevitable. Grandpa, this isn't the time for heroic gestures. These people killed Jesse Owens. Jesse died of lung cancer in 1980. Natural causes, remember? Tyler paused, laptop halfway into his bag. You think Sam was lying about that too? Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where the security guard was finishing his rounds. I think Sam Morrison has been controlling the narrative around Jesse Owens for 84 years. Jesse's death, the circumstances, the timing. How would we ever know the difference between natural causes and something more carefully orchestrated? The implications settled over Tyler like ice water. How many people connected to that night in Berlin had died over the decades? How many convenient accidents, natural illnesses, or simple disappearances had Sam arranged to protect his version of history? He kept you alive, Tyler said, trying to find solid ground in the shifting foundation of their reality. For 40 years, he protected you. Why change now? Marcus touched the champagne flute, his fingers tracing the delicate stem. Because 40 years ago, I was just a traumatized coach with fragmented memories. I wasn't a threat, I was an asset, living proof of the official story. But now? Now I'm a 73-year-old man with nothing left to lose, talking to a documentary filmmaker with the skills to expose everything. Marcus turned from the window, his expression grim but determined. And Sam Morrison is in his 90s. Whatever this conspiracy was, whatever American interests he's been protecting all these years, he's running out of time to ensure it dies with him. Tyler felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You think this is his endgame? Clean up the loose ends before he dies? I think Sam Morrison spent 84 years believing that some secrets are worth any price. That protecting American Olympic prestige or national security interests or whatever he tells himself he's defending justifies murder. Marcus picked up the note that had come with the champagne flute, reading it again. You should have died that night. Not a threat, a statement of regret. He's correcting what he sees as a mistake. The conference room door opened and Sarah appeared with her evening medication tray. She smiled warmly at Tyler before turning to Marcus. Time for your blood pressure pills, Mr. Hartwell. And you have a visitor waiting in your room. Says he's an old friend from your Olympic days. Tyler's blood turned to ice. Marcus met his grandson's eyes across the conference room table, and Tyler saw 40 years of guilt and confusion crystallize into something harder and more dangerous. The reckoning Sam Morrison had spent decades orchestrating was finally here. Marcus stood slowly, his hands steady as he reached for the champagne flute. For the first time in 40 years, Tyler saw his grandfather move with the deliberate grace that had once made him one of America's finest track coaches, economical, purposeful, unafraid. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice carrying quiet authority, "I need you to call 911. Tell them there's been a threat against residents at Sunset Manor. Then I need you to take Tyler and get him out of the building." "Grandpa." "No." "Tyler." Marcus turned, and his grandson saw something in those weathered eyes that made him fall silent. "This conversation started in Berlin 84 years ago. It ends here, tonight, with me." Sarah clutched her medication tray, confusion and fear warring across her face. "Mr. Hartwell, I don't understand." "The visitor in my room isn't a friend," Marcus said gently, "and he's not here for a social call. Please, Sarah, make the call and get Tyler to safety." Tyler grabbed his grandfather's arm. "We leave together, or we don't leave at all." Marcus studied his grandson's face, seeing decades of his own stubborn determination reflected back at him. Finally, he nodded. "Then we do this together, but we do it right." They moved through the retirement home's corridors like ghosts, Marcus leading with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years navigating these halls. The evening medication rounds provided perfect cover, Sarah's cart serving as both explanation for their presence and mobile barrier between them and Marcus's room at the far end of the building. As they approached his door, Marcus held up his hand, stopping them short of the threshold. Through the thin wall, Tyler could hear voices, one unfamiliar, speaking with careful precision, the other unmistakably Sam Morrison's raspy tone crackling through a phone speaker. "He knows we're coming," the unfamiliar voice said. "Should I wait?" "No more waiting," Sam's voice replied. 84 years is long enough. Make it look natural. Heart attack, stroke, something consistent with his age. The grandson, too, if necessary. Tyler felt his world narrow to the sound of his own heartbeat. But Marcus stepped forward, his hand on the door handle, and spoke clearly enough for both men inside to hear. "Hello, Sam." The voices inside went silent. Then footsteps, quick and professional, moving toward the window. Marcus opened the door and walked into his own room like a man entering his office for a routine meeting. The visitor was younger than Tyler expected, perhaps 60, with the compact build of someone who'd stayed in exceptional physical condition. He stood by the window, phone in one hand, the other reaching toward his jacket. But he stopped when he saw Marcus, something like recognition flickering across his features. "You look like him," Marcus said conversationally. "The waiter from Berlin. Same eyes, same careful way of moving." "His son?" "Grandson," the man replied. "And you were supposed to be a footnote in history by now." Sam's voice cut through the phone speaker. "Marcus, this doesn't have to be complicated. You've had a good life, longer than most. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Marcus walked to his bedside table and picked up a framed photograph. Tyler recognized it as the picture of Jesse Owens they'd examined weeks ago, before any of this started. Before their simple documentary project had unraveled decades of carefully buried truth. "Jesse was my friend," Marcus said quietly. "He trusted me to tell his story honestly. Instead, I spent 40 years repeating lies about heroism I never earned while the real villains wrote the history books." "You saved lives by keeping quiet," Sam's voice insisted. "American Olympic programs, international relationships, careers of innocent people who would have been destroyed by association." "Innocent?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sam, I may be old, but I'm not senile. Tyler showed me the research. Those innocent people you protected included business leaders who funneled money to the Nazi Party through 1943, Olympic officials who helped recruit American athletes for German propaganda films, board members who actively sabotaged Jewish athletes' chances of making the team." The man by the window shifted slightly, his hand moving closer to his jacket. But Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "The conspiracy Jesse died protecting wasn't ancient history. It was ongoing collaboration with enemies of everything America claimed to represent. And you spent 8 decades making sure the truth died with everyone who knew it." "Some truths are too dangerous," Sam said through the speaker. "And some lies are too poisonous." Marcus set down Jesse's photograph and picked up the champagne flute, holding it up to catch the room's overhead light. "This glass has been waiting 84 years to tell its story. I think it's time people heard it." Tyler stepped forward, his camera already recording, as 3 generations of secrets finally collided in a small retirement homeroom where the past had come to collect its due. The champagne flute caught the overhead light one final time before Marcus set it gently on his bedside table, next to Jesse's photograph. In that moment, Tyler understood that his grandfather wasn't just holding evidence. He was cradling the weight of 84 years. The man by the window moved with the fluid precision Tyler had come to expect from professionals in violence. But Marcus was already speaking, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally stopped running from his own story. "Your grandfather served poisoned champagne to the wrong man," Marcus said. "But maybe that was never the point, was it? Maybe the point was always to silence anyone who got too close to the truth." Through the phone speaker, Sam's voice carried the brittle authority of old age and older secrets. "Marcus, you're forcing my hand." The line went dead as Marcus disconnected the call with one decisive motion. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a precipice. Tyler's camera continued recording, capturing the moment when decades of careful deception finally cracked open like an egg. The assassin's grandson reached inside his jacket, but Marcus was already moving with the surprising speed of a man who had spent his life training athletes to react faster than thought. "Sarah," Marcus called, never taking his eyes off the man by the window. "Are those sirens I hear?" They all listened. In the distance, growing closer, came the wail of emergency vehicles responding to Sarah's call. The sound seemed to deflate something in the assassin's posture, not fear exactly, but the recognition that certain windows of opportunity had permanently closed. "This doesn't end tonight," he said, his voice carrying the same careful precision as his movements. "There are others who've spent their lives protecting these secrets. And there are others who've spent their lives waiting to expose them," Tyler replied, still filming. "The difference is, we're not afraid of the truth anymore." The man studied them both for a long moment, then moved toward the door with the same professional calm he'd maintained throughout the encounter. "Some stories are bigger than the people who try to tell them, and some people are bigger than the stories they inherit," Marcus replied. After he left, Marcus sank into his chair as if the weight of 40 years had finally settled on his shoulders all at once. Tyler stopped recording and sat on the edge of the bed, both of them listening to the approaching sirens and wondering what came next. "The documentary," Tyler said eventually. "Do we still—" "We tell Jesse's story," Marcus said firmly. "All of it. The hero he was, the conspiracy he died trying to expose, and the system that spent 8 decades burying the truth." He picked up the photograph again, studying Jesse's young face. "But we tell my story too. The coward who kept quiet, the man who lived on borrowed heroism, while better people died for their courage." Tyler looked at his grandfather, really looked at him, and saw someone fundamentally changed from the man who had started this journey weeks ago. The guilt was still there, carved into the lines around his eyes, but it was accompanied now by something harder and more honest. Peace, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. "You saved his life that night," Tyler said quietly. "That part was real. For a few decades, maybe. But Sam was right about one thing. They always intended to finish the job. I just delayed the inevitable." Marcus set down the photograph and turned to face his grandson. "The question now is whether we can make those decades count for something." Over the following weeks, as Tyler edited footage and Marcus gave interviews to federal investigators, they began to understand the true scope of what they had uncovered. Sam Morrison died in his sleep 3 days after their confrontation, peacefully according to the obituary, surrounded by family. The assassin's grandson disappeared entirely, as if he had never existed. But the story lived on. Tyler's documentary premiered 6 months later, not as the celebration of heroism he had originally envisioned, but as something more complex and ultimately more honest. An exploration of how ordinary people become complicit in extraordinary lies and what it costs to finally tell the truth. Marcus lived to see it aired. He died the following spring, at 74, holding Jesse's photograph and surrounded by family who finally understood the weight he had carried all those years. The champagne flute sat on his bedside table until the end. catching the afternoon light like a prism that split white lies into component truths. At the funeral, Tyler found himself thinking about inherited stories, the ones we choose to perpetuate and the ones we choose to challenge. His grandfather had spent 40 years as a reluctant guardian of other people's secrets. In the end, he had chosen to become the keeper of his own truth. The documentary continued to air, reaching new audiences who had never heard of Jesse Owens or the 1936 Olympics. But they recognized something universal in Marcus's story: the weight of complicity, the cost of silence, and the courage required to speak truth to power, even when that power has had 84 years to perfect its lies. Some stories, Tyler learned, are worth the telling precisely because they refuse to stay buried.